Good morning and welcome to our guest speaker in communications law for Com Week 2021. It is my great honor to introduce one of my favorite people in the world, Dr. Genelle Belmas, to Com Week. Dr. Belmas is not new to Com Week. She is a former faculty member in the Department of Communications at Cal State Fullerton and was an integral part of Com Week for the years that she was on the faculty here. So let me tell you a little about Dr. Belmas, and then we are going to explore her love and passion for all things communications law and the First Amendment. So Dr. Belmas is an associate professor at the William Allen White School of Journalism and Mass Communication at the University of Kansas. She teaches media law, media ethics, communication technology, and gamification. Her research primarily focuses on media law and media ethics. Her work has appeared in many journals, including the Yale Journal of Online Law and Technology, Fordham Intellectual Property, Media Entertainment Law Journal, Federal Communications Law Journal, to name a few. She has been cited by several appellate courts. She is the lead author of our textbook in the class, Major Principles of Media Law, and she's been the recipient of several research and teaching external grants. She has a bachelor's degree in journalism and political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, a master's degree in political science from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a PhD in mass communication from the University of Minnesota. So welcome, Dr. Belmas, to Com Week 2021.
Thanks so much for your invitation.
So let's start our conversation by asking you, how did you become interested in media law?
Well, I guess it goes back to when I was an undergraduate. So I was an undergraduate, as Dr. Shepard just said, at the University of Wisconsin, and I took a required, what I call Your Friend the Mass Media class. It was Journalism 201 there, I think. And it was with a professor who allowed us to do honors projects. And so I said, I'm interested in doing an honors project. He said, well, what would you like to do an honors project on? And I said, I don't know, maybe something, why don't you suggest? So he suggested a couple of topics, and one of which was looking at reporters' privilege. And if you haven't reached that in your 407 class, you will. That is all about reporters' privilege, SHIA laws, ability of reporters to protect or not protect their confidential sources of information from subpoena and use by the police and by the courts, so as to keep the source live. I wrote a short little paper on it and fell in love. Then I had to take my media law class at the University of Wisconsin. I don't remember the number of it, but I had a wonderful instructor there named Mary Ann Udella Smith, who really fostered my budding desire in the law, or my budding interest in the law, and my desire to keep thinking about it. I remember I did for a project on libel for that class, where I sort of took people through the libel process and a little bit of a case study, doing absolutely dead basic computer programming, which was sort of a big deal in 1980 something. So it was really fun, and I've continued to love it ever since. It's the best stuff ever. We teach the best stuff ever because it impacts all of us in so many ways that we don't even really think about every day as we're going through our lives. And if we didn't have it, we would really know. We'd really know.
Did you pretty much know kind of early on in the middle of your undergraduate career that this was going to be one of your lifelong passions, media law and the First Amendment?
Honestly, yes. After I took that advanced level, it was a journalism class, a journalism law, media law class. I wasn't really sure, I'll be honest, what I was going to major in. So I had come into the university, you're going to laugh, maybe I've never told you this, as a double major in English and astronomy. I mean, okay, I didn't know how much maths there were in astronomy, and I was told there would be no maths. So that went by the wayside on the second course, where I looked at these, I was like, I can't do this. I love the intro class, but the advanced not so much. And English was great. I'm still very fond of the classes I took in English, including some creative writing ones that were a ton of fun, but it just didn't feel as fulfilling. So I sort of took one semester, the semester I took the intro to journalism, or the intro to mass comm class, I took a bunch of other courses in a bunch of other areas. So I took an anthropology course and an economics course and a history course and a educational psychology course and a journalism course, saying, okay, I've got this panoply of kind of basic interests. What am I going to go with? And I love poli-sci. I still love poli-sci. I fell in love with poli-sci and law, right? Constitutional law, and First Amendment, of course, is part of constitutional law. It's the rights side. And decided that I wanted to double major in journalism and political science. The poli-sci was really for me because I really found it fascinating. The journalism was because my mom and dad said, what are you going to do with a poli-sci degree? And I said, I don't know, I guess I'll take a journalism degree too, because I can always be a reporter, which I was for a while. So best stuff ever. So con law is only a small part, is First Amendment stuff, but it's among the best parts. So
you've been teaching media law for quite some time.
oh my word,
Uh,
yes.
I won't hazard to guess, but decades.
Pretty close. Well, yeah, over actually.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
oh my God, actually double over. My first class I TA'd was for one of my professors at Minnesota. That was the fall of 1995. And my first standalone class by myself was the following semester, 1996. So
So what are
a
some
long
of your
time.
favorite topics to teach when you're teaching a media law class?
I know it's probably not appropriate to say all of them, but I love them all in their own little ways. It's like your kids. How do you pick one, right? Um, I really tend to focus on speech law over press law. So press law is critically important, of course, for us to understand as media professionals what we can and can't do. But the speech law, to me, gives more of a grittier topics to talk about. And it usually results in an awful lot of student discussion, which is a lot of fun. So, for example, I'm interested in the law of flags, like American flags. We Americans are flipping out crazy about our flags. Every time I talk about this, I invariably get a student who's an international student saying, how come you Americans are so weird about your flag? I don't know, but we have a lot of law about it. And I really like teaching about uh, the current state of the law and actually discussing with the students what they think the law ought to be. Should the law protect, as it does, the desecration of the American flag? Why? Why not? It's a lot of fun to talk about. Actually, this semester, some of the most heaviest discussion in my class here at KU focused on the Snyder versus Phelps, which is the Westboro Baptist Church, because we're right down the road, about a half an hour from Topeka. A lot of my students have seen them in person. And we talked a lot about the limits of freedom of expression. To what extent does your right to speak stuff that might hurt feelings, to what extent should that be protected? As well as what is protected. So I guess I would say the speech law, although, press law is equally important. And I love the law of the student press in particular. I think it's fascinating stuff. New case coming down to the Supreme Court too. It's going to be interesting. I'm scared, but it'll be fun.
Looking back at students over time in your classes, how do students view First Amendment rights today, and how has that changed over time? You mentioned the Snyder v. Phelps case. I think a lot of students probably side with Justice Alito in the dissent in that case, seeing that, believing that the harms of having somebody protest the funeral of a fallen soldier is so offensive that does not deserve First Amendment protection. But yet most First Amendment scholars would probably say, giving the protesters First Amendment rights to be offensive is at the heart of the First Amendment. So,
right.
How do you
Traditional liberal perspective? So,
yeah,
I mean, admittedly, my sample is skewed because I've taught media folk, right? Students who want to go into the media, and that includes journalism and public relations and advertising. And we call it here strategic communication, but it's the same thing as PR and advertising by you. So it's skewed a little bit because my students tend to be a little more protective perhaps than the average. But even within that group, I agree with you, Dr. Shepard. I agree that we have started to see a shift in perspective on what should be protected by freedom of speech and press. So, for example, one of my other great debates this semester, in fact, it was one of the reasons we're a little bit more behind than I would like to be this semester, is because my students were very interested in Section 230. So Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act is 26 words that created the internet, if you look at a book title of that name. And that law, that one single law, has been instrumental in creating what we view as our current internet, whether that's internet 3.0, 4.0, whatever number, right? The interactive internet, which isn't just me speaking out, but it's us talking to each other. Okay. And there have been a number of books and other articles and scholars out there who have started to shift away from the traditional liberal perspective, right? That you just outlined. And Don Gilmore, my advisor, would probably roll over in his grave if he heard me say this, but I see their point. My First Amendment, the First Amendment I want to support, may not be the liberal, anything goes, more speech, not enforced silence that I used to espouse, right? So my students reflect that too, because they're deeply concerned about harming each other, right? And in today's, Black Lives Matter, and I mean the trial right now is taking all of our time and energy. The George Floyd one, and they're concerned, deeply concerned about how we treat each other with speech. And I used to say, someday I'm going to get the quote from a very old case in 1927, Whitney versus California, tattooed on my person somewhere, more speech, not enforced silence. I don't know that I will anymore. I'm kind of glad I didn't too, because tattoos are forever. But I don't know if I believe that as much anymore. I still want more speech than most, but I'm not sure I'm as cool with the everything goes and the market will out than I used to be. One of my graduate students is fond of saying, there is no marketplace. The marketplace is broken. Maybe he's right. Maybe he's right. But I do think that the best speech helps us become a self-governing democracy. And it heartens me to hear students discuss this so thoughtfully and be so concerned about it, because it suggests to me that I'm going to be handing off, I'm not young anymore, handing off our democracy to some good hands. And that makes me feel good. It makes me relieved.
So would you say over time you have become less of a First Amendment absolutist?
I was never a First Amendment absolutist, never. Anybody, forgive me, Jason, anybody who says they are doesn't understand the First Amendment at all. But the First Amendment has never been an absolute document. Have I become more, I don't want to say more conservative, but the darlings of freedom of expression in the 60s and 70s, and maybe even up to the 80s, were the people who consider themselves left-leaning, right? They're the ones who always feel like government is impinging on us too much. Now freedom of expression is shifting. The ideas and the passion behind it might be shifting to those individuals who lean more right or conservative, in that they feel like their voices are not heard. In whatever, you can, whatever term you want to use, woke culture, cancel culture, etc. I've seen that happen in my lifetime. I haven't watched every single thing closely, but I can certainly tell you that there's a trend, and that I wonder how, if push came to shove, what would I be willing, me personally, what would I be willing to say no to? What would I be okay? Would I be okay with shutting down Fred Phelps's crew at the Westboro Baptist Church? And my answer for that one is no. I'm not. I want that to happen, because again, there are ways for counter speech to happen there, right? That's a one-on-one personal thing, right? And in fact, as you know, the Snyder family didn't even know this was happening until they saw it on the news, right? So harm, we can question about whether or not there was actually harm done there. And even if there was an opportunity to slap back right away, right? But when we talk about the internet, how do you speak back against Twitter or against the blogosphere, or against, your one voice in the wilderness over there, in the corner, against, Facebook and the like. So I find it fascinating that at the January 6th Incitement Act, I think it's incitement personally, at the Capitol, that it took Facebook and Twitter until then to close the president's accounts down and stop him from speaking, right? And whether or not you agree with that, that was pretty momentous. Pretty momentous. I don't love it because I don't like the idea of not speech, but I don't know how else to do it in that case. And again, I tend to fall more, left leaning, but I'm deeply concerned about deplatforming as well because the pendulum swings both ways, right? What's with me today is going to be against me tomorrow. And I don't want to set up rules that could bite me in the butt later on. So
Yeah.
I don't know if that answers your question or not, but
yeah, it does. And I think the deplatforming of the president is such a interesting example. I mean, it's hard before Donald Trump to think that silencing the president is a good idea, right? But the events of January 6th and the actions of the president really present some difficult challenges. I think you're right. I too am concerned about the precedent of deplatforming public figures. I mean, Donald Trump was elected president of the United States, and then to say that the public needs to be protected from his speech is alarming, right?
Yeah, it is alarming. Although I have to admit a little bit of sad laughter, maybe it's the best way to say, when I hear the certain parties say, well, we have given social media too much power. They should not be able to control this. Well, my friends, that's how capitalism works, right? That's how capitalism works. Capitalism says, let the market decide. The market's decided that it can grow and grow and grow and grow and give an important platform. And if they feel like it, they can shut it off. Is there a state action issue there? And smarter people than I have argued that, the social media is like the company town, right? Is like the should be imbued with sufficient state action that there ought to perhaps be regulations on it. And if I had to lay my, as I said to my students, my $4 million paycheck, and then I wait for them to laugh on it, I don't think we're going to get out of this year without something happening to Section 230. I don't know what it'll be. I don't know if I'll like it, but I would lay my paycheck. Something will happen. Some regulatory agency will dive in and say, we're not going to let this happen the way it did before. And whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It's reactionary, which I don't love, but I mean, something they're going to say something has to give, and I'm not entirely sure they're wrong.
Maybe just talk a little more about that. What are the pros or benefits that Section 230 has brought to kind of internet culture? And so why does that give you pause about these calls to eliminate or change Section 230?
Well, Section 230 allows, I can't say the 26 words. I wish I could just recite them out, but the basic idea behind it is that internet ISPs, internet service providers, and by that I mean Yelp and Twitter and Facebook and Amazon and fill in the blank, right, are not publishers of content, meaning they're not directly responsible for content that other people post. They are distributors. Okay. So if you think about it in down to earth terms, Yelp could not exist without Section 230 because unhappy businesses would have sued it out of existence. Right. Section 230 has, since its inception, been very broadly construed in the courts to protect an awful lot of speech that people allege is harmful, under the idea that, in other words, and keep liability away from the companies. So they don't have to pay for it, right? Because it's all about money. This is all about money. So it's been interpreted very broadly to protect a whole bunch of content, speech, that might otherwise not be able to be out there, and allowed then the participatory internet to grow, right? To allow the Yelps, to allow the Amazon reviews, to allow this Twitter and the Facebook and the Instagram and the TikTok and the to grow, because those would have been sued, probably out of existence within the first couple of years. Now we as a community, as a society, we like the participatory internet. We want to be able to talk back. We don't want talking heads at us anymore. We're trained. We want to be able to talk back, right? That doesn't always mean that we talk back nicely, correctly, without libel, without hate speech. And the law has been written such that any kind of speech that a platform determines as somehow harmful, meaning it's either false or pornographic or vents child pornography or is outward false, that they can act to take down some of that content. So in other words, let's say, Dr. Shepard, that I post on your newspaper website a commentary about a news article, and I say, oh, by the way, the reporter, I am pretty sure the reporter, John Smith, is the guy who broke into my house last week. Maybe not true, but Dr. Shepard would have the right, because that edges on libel, right, to take that content down without giving up the protection that 230 otherwise gives. So it's called the Good Samaritan provision. But it's a nice way to say, go ahead and edit the really bad stuff. And Twitter, when it labeled the president's tweets back on, not this coming, but last summer, was exercising some of those rights to just tell the public, think about this before you believe it. That's capitalism, right? That is a private company exercising rights on how it wants its products to be used. It is true that we have allowed social media to gain a lot of strength, right? And we've given it the opportunities to have those Good Samaritan rules to go in and edit that stuff. I'm not completely sure that we should complain when it does that. So, and I certainly don't want Twitter taken over by the Fed or the states. I don't want that to be a government thing, right? So how to strike that balance is going to be one of the key questions that face us in the next couple of years on how we manage our continued reliance on social media and the impact it's having on all aspects of our lives.
That's a great bridge to my next question. Can you talk a little about your views on the current Supreme Court? We have the Roberts Court in existence, and the Roberts Court has in some ways been very pro First Amendment, and in other ways maybe less so. What are your views on the Roberts Court in relation to free speech and the First Amendment?
Well, as you pointed out, the Supreme Court is now more conservative leaning than it's been, I don't want to say in my lifetime, but pretty close. I mean, I've been alive since Brennan and Marshall were on the court. I mean, I'm that old. But certainly if you do you do the counts, the liberal leaning, and remember John Paul Stevens was one of the liberal leaners on the court. My husband always laughs about that because when he came on, he was conservative in that way the court was structured. And then when he retired, he was kind of on the left leaning end. So there have been a lot of articles written on what the Roberts Court, is it really the Roberts Court, or was it the Scalia Court, or was it and I don't have a strong opinion on that. What I do have a strong opinion on, though, is the notion that I'm very afraid for some areas of our jurisprudence because of some of the ways that some of the Supreme Court think about some speakers. For example, there is a case, as I intimated earlier, coming to the Supreme Court. In fact, it'll be argued later this month. I believe it's the 28th of April. It's a case where a young woman, a high school student, was peeved that she was not permitted to be on the varsity cheerleading squad. She was instead put on the JV squad. She went to her Instagram account, posted a picture of herself and her friend, flipping the bird, and captioned it with a bunch of F-bombs. F cheerleading, F this, F that, blah, 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 blah. Well, it turns out that the school, like many schools, had a policy that said, thou shalt not diss the cheer squad on social media or anywhere else. Okay. So as a result, somebody took a picture of her snap. It was a Snapchat, sorry, her Snapchat, because it's shorter. So they took a picture of her snap and showed it to the coaches and the cheerleading coaches, and the coaches kicked her off the team. All right. She sued. She moved up all the way to the Supreme Court. And the question before the court right now, and one that I'm scared to death to hear about, to have decided, is does the reach of the school, to hit speech, which has primarily and historically been within the schoolhouse gates, right? reach outside. And if I do my maths, if I do my counting, it's not going to look good for student speech. Okay. Justice Clarence Thomas, who again is more complex than I think many of us give him credit for. We tend to paint him as the quintessential conservative. I don't think it's necessarily that dramatic, but certainly he has made it clear in the student speech cases that he would overturn the Tinker case, which is the 1960s case that set up the idea that, and you've heard this quote before, student speech rights don't stop at the schoolhouse gates, right? That in other words, we need to be able to allow students to learn, high school, we're talking high school kids to learn about how our democracy works by not shutting them down every time they try to speak. We want to teach them how to self-govern and how to govern each other, right? Rather than just shutting them down. Justice Thomas said, Tinker was wrongly decided and I would get rid of it. Well, he may have the votes. And if you hear screaming, Dr. Shepard, from the middle of the country, that's me when the case comes down. Because I will be, well, me and a whole bunch of other people, we are going to be devastated. And it will be much less good for student speech and press nationally. Then we'll really need those new voices laws. We'll really need laws that try to protect. And they're going to have to be broader. It's not just student media, then it's going to have to be student speech. It's got to be, right? So, and again, Justice Thomas he doesn't hide things much. He's very blunt. Tinker was wrongly decided, I get rid of it. Well, he thinks that the school acts in loco parentis, in the place of the parent, and that anything the school does is in place of the parent, which means it's okay to do, right? If you can't, if the school orders you not to speak, it's okay because it's like mom and dad ordering you not to speak, okay? Do I disagree? Heartily, heartily, but I'm not in the Supreme Court either. So if I had to count votes, I'm scared. In fact, I was just emailing with somebody today and she's like, I'm terrified because when this comes down, it's going to gut. It's going to gut what we've worked so hard in the Student Press Law Center and other places over the years to enhance the right of students to speak their minds. So, and again, because student media is more and more important, I mean, there are many places where the student news organizations are either compete with or are the only media org in town, right? They're the local press, right? And we want them to be able to speak freely. And I don't even want to go into the whole other question of do we treat college students differently from high school students. But that's not a pure reflection on the Roberts Court itself. But I would never have guessed. I'll be honest. I would never have guessed in my lifetime that we would be in danger of losing the protections of Tinker, which was very good for students. But Justice Thomas also is on record as saying that New York Times versus Sullivan was wrongly decided and should be gotten rid of. And that gives us heart attacks because New York Times versus Sullivan is the one case that we all rely upon as our foundations for freedom of the press. That gets gutted. Okay, political opinion here. That gets gutted and we're an authoritarian nation. Done, done, and done. Because it's only a matter of time then. Once you take away Sullivan and the right of reporters and journalists and any speaker, right? We're all reporters now. We can all be journalists, right? You can put up a blog and be a journalist. The ability to criticize public officials is the day we become an authoritarian society. And I don't want to live to see that. I'm not that old yet, but I certainly don't want to live to see it. It's horrifying, horrifying. Now, nobody else signed on to Thomas's opinion there. It was in the Bill Cosby cases, one of the Bill Cosby libel cases. But I don't know. I haven't done enough research into some of these new justices, right? We've gotten 3 new ones, really quick succession, right? Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Coney Barrett. Boom, boom, boom. And they don't have enough jurisprudence for us to tell. They have a little bit on the lower courts, but what they say goes, my friends. Supreme Court's last word. You start over if you lose there. So anyway,
I mean, I
I don't know
think
if that helps you.
that underscores how fascinating the short-term future is going to be in some of these First Amendment cases. I think you're right to be really worried about the
Right.
the
And
students press.
I'm sorry. Yeah. And I hope I'm not alone in that, and I suspect I'm not, but once the Supreme Court speaks, it's game over, man. Right? That's it. Now you have to you have to change the law. You have to change in First Amendment's case, you have to either change the Constitution somehow or somehow get around that decision with state, because federal government puts a floor, not a ceiling on what can be done. So you'd have to get around it with state courts and state legislatures doing something about this. So,
And maybe just
uh,
you
mm,
mentioned the New Voices efforts.
mm,
Maybe explain how that is a bit of a bright spot in the student speech and press law area,
right.
not constitutional right necessarily, but we're seeing more and more states give student speech and press protections through statutes, right?
Yep. Yep. Through state statutes. So New Voices laws is the term given to the push that the Student Press Law Center and others is making towards state legislatures, encouraging them to pass laws that protect student speech and press. Okay. California's had one forever. All right. In fact, it has several. It has a bunch of things like stealing newspapers. It protects advisors. You can't steal. Can you steal free newspapers? Well, yeah, you can. There's rules on that for, because that's one way that administrators like to get around is they like to take the product, right? Or as one of my colleagues said, we have to worry about IT because IT is the censor of last resort. They pull that plug and it's over, man. Your website comes down, right? What do you do about that? So there is that. California's done that for a long time. Kansas has actually done it. Oddly enough, this little state in the middle of the country that's generally leans pretty conservatively has had a law in place since the 90s also. So up until, I don't know, the last 5 or 6 years, maybe, there were, 7 states maybe with with these laws that protected student speech. And now it's doubled that. It's 14. And Nebraska's real close, maybe, maybe. And so the New Voices initiative is an attempt to circumvent any high court proclaim, announcements of restriction of press rights, speech rights, because the federal government provides a floor between which you cannot go, right? It does not offer a ceiling. So if states want to offer more protection, they can do that. And that's what the New Voices movement is all about, is to say, look, we understand there's been a series of cases. Student speech has come before the Supreme Court 4 times. It's lost 3 of those 4. Okay. We recognize that it doesn't look good, but that's only a floor. We can do more at the state level. And that's what these New Voices laws are supposed to do, is to provide the opportunity for states to provide more protection than the federal government does for speech within its state. Okay. So that's one of the biggest initiatives of the Student Press Law Center right now. I was supposed to interview the head of the Student Press Law Center, a woman named Hadar Harris, for another project. And, she wrote me a very kind note saying, I'd love to talk to you, but I am swamped between this Mahonoi case, right, the Snapchat case, and these New Voices initiatives, which we think are going to be really critical. So can we talk later? Sure. So it's a big deal. It's a big deal.
Well, I mean, I think we both agree the Student Press Law Center is one of those organizations doing God's work,
Mm-hmm. You don't make a ton of money working there, but boy, can you have a ton of effect. So, and that is true also for Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press too. I mean, also doing God's work, also really working to support and help news organizations, but speakers. It's really reporters, so it's really news organizations, but that benefiting a news organization benefits us all, right? Because we can all be journalists. There's no law that says that you right now listening to this are not a journalist. If you have a blog, my friend, you are a journalist, right? Now, Congress gets skeevy about that. That's why we don't have a federal shield law, because they're like, but, do we really want to protect every single person with a blog out there? My answer is, why not? But their answer is, oh no. So that's one of the big things that's held back a federal shield law.
So I've got two questions left before we wrap up. Can you talk a little about what some of your favorite research projects have been in your career? You've been a prolific media law and First Amendment scholar. What have been some of your favorite projects?
Well, you know as well as I do, Dr. Shepard, that anonymity is cool. So, he mentioned the Yale Journal. What he didn't mention, because he's a little too modest, is that was a co-authored publication with him. And he was actually the first author on it. And I'm still very, very proud of that work. I've leaned away from anonymity a little bit, not because I don't like it, but because I'm sort of like I feel sort of like a squirrel. Look, there's a nut. Look, there's a nut. Look, there's a nut. Look, there's a nut. So many cool things to research. So it's not that I don't love the stuff anymore. But recently, I'm deeply interested in a law called Title IX. And Title IX, you might know of as the law that was passed in the 70s to make it so that colleges can't discriminate against women's sports. Okay. And under the Obama administration, it was very much expanded to cover all sexual misconduct at universities and colleges across the country. If a university or college gets any federal money at all, and that would be every one of them, they have to abide by Title IX. Okay. And under Title IX, there is a rule that calls people that suggests that there are some individuals at every academic setting, right? This is also for high schools and junior highs too, who are called responsible employees. Now, what that means is that in practice, I'm a responsible employee at KU. If a student comes to me, a young woman comes to me and says, I really want to talk to you, Dr. Belmas. My boyfriend struck me last night and raped me. Can I talk to you about this? I have to say, hold on a minute. I want you to get some help for this, but I have to report this to the Title IX coordinator. That troubles me deeply because this student has gotten up all of her courage to tell somebody she thinks she can trust about this traumatic event. And I have to shut her down and say, you can't talk about this in confidence with me because I can't keep your confidence. That's messed up. Okay. Now, Title IX was deeply, deeply revised under the Trump administration by Betsy DeVos. Some of those changes that were made are probably going to get reversed under Biden, but not I'm going to bet, not the responsible employee category, right? So one of the things that was nice about this is that there's a bright line between high schools, junior highs, secondary schools and post-secondary schools, right? So the grade schools and the junior highs and the high schools have one rule, the universities and colleges have another, okay? So there's a bright line. If you work at all at a school like a grade school or a junior high or a high school, doesn't matter if you're a teacher, the principal, a janitor, a cook, a student aide, anything, or a teacher aide, anything. If you hear about sexual harassment or someone reports it, you are a reporter. You are a reporter. You are obligated to go to the Title IX coordinator in your district and report that. But for colleges and universities, they left the door very open, saying, we're going to trust that you will determine what your who counts as a responsible employee. And under the Obama administration, schools were encouraged to make many, many, many people responsible employees. I think that's wrong because of the circumstance I just talked about, right? I cannot give one of my students confidentiality in reporting something that's deeply traumatic to him or her, right? I have no choice. Is that an infringement of my expression? Well, maybe. There's also some other wrinkles in there that make it very, very interesting to me in terms of how Title IX can be weaponized against the media. So I won't go into all of those, but I'm really hot on that right now because to me, it's maddening because it's a use of a law that is supposed to be positive and protective and supportive of women to harm them by making it so that they lose agency. And that deeply, deeply distresses me. There are some First Amendment implications in there, but maybe I'm just being more of a feminist right now and worried about that part of it. What I'm going to do is do a book right now. I've actually got a grant out and I hope it'll be funded to actually talk to Title IX coordinators to see around the country to see if they are going to change their reporting procedures under this administration, under this new set of rules, because they don't have to. They can leave whatever they had in place, and inertia would suggest that they might. So that's something I'm hot on right now. And I'm also hot on this Mahanoy, or however you pronounce it, Mahanoy. So the student speech case that's coming, because that's my other area of interest is student speech law and flags. I love flags. So.
Well, let me kind of end on a question about what you hope students learn when they take a communications law course. What do you want them to walk away from your class better understanding or appreciating or knowing?
Well, I have several things with that. First, I want them to walk out appreciating, right? If you do nothing else, if a student has nothing else in my class, they should walk out appreciating the fact that this is a long history of, a little bit checkered sometimes, but of protecting freedom of expression, whether speech or press, in our American democracy, right? Starting back in World War I and even earlier in some cases, okay? So there's a history there that I think is important to understand. Two, I want students to understand that this class is not going to make any of us lawyers. We're going to walk out with a good red flag um, of what we need to talk about. So many media organizations, public relations agencies, ad firms, ad agencies will have either in-house attorneys or have a relationship with a external law firm to provide them legal help, right? I want students to understand when they may have to talk to a lawyer, right? In other words, they want to look something over and say, this doesn't seem right. This seems wrong. Belmas taught me that maybe this is wrong and I need to go talk to a lawyer. That's what I hope that hope does, right? And then the third hope, and I don't get this as often as I would like, is that they fall in love with it like I have, right? Because to me, you take away, even barring my concerns about the marketplace of ideas, you take away freedom of expression, right? You eliminate it or tamp it down or restrict it too much. And what are we in? We're in an authoritarian system. And I don't want to see that happen to this country. I really don't. I don't get many people falling in love with the law like I do. And what I say at the very first day is, I want you to walk out of this class thinking, oh, that didn't suck. And if I get that, I'm happy. But many, many times I've heard from students, this was my favorite class because I didn't know all this stuff was going on. I didn't know this was going to happen. I didn't know this was happening. And we talked about it and it was cool. And I thought about it and I talked about it with my mom and dad and my friends. Oh, that's heaven. Because that suggests that y'all are carrying content just, from the hallowed halls of the school into the rest of your lives. And that can only be good. That can only be good, even if you end up disagreeing with me. I mean, I'd prefer you agreed. But if through the process of your own rational thinking, you disagree, I'll support it. I'll support it because you went through the process for yourself. So, like I said, I'll take that didn't suck, but I prefer this was really cool and I really enjoyed your class. And you don't even have to tell me that. Just enjoy it. You don't have to tell me because I can tell it by your questions in your eyes. I can tell when you're doing this and I have to change something, and I can tell when you're doing this and I should go on. Y'all have very expressive faces. So, and I watch because I care. I watch because I care. So,
Well,
sounds really Pollyanna, but that's okay. I'm pretty Pollyanna.
Knowing your students over the years, I know the vast majority of them do walk out saying, I loved this. I learned so much from this. And I think it's one of the, the topics that we teach are so important. If we can bring them to life and show meaning, and it's so important. I think, we are living in such a time with the events that are going on in the country and the world that debates and ideas about free speech and free expression and democracy and authoritarianism are so important and they are so relevant to the topics in communications law. So Dr. Belmas, I would like to thank you so much for joining us at Fullerton and Com Week. It is so wonderful to see you.
And hi to all my friends. I just say hi to everybody for me. I miss you guys. And I also miss some of the restaurants there. Oh my word, I miss some of the restaurants. I miss Sweetie Thai out in Garden Grove. If you ever never been to Sweetie Thai, if it's still there, go there. It's really good. I miss that a lot. So, all right.
Excellent recommendation.
Thanks very much.
Thank you again, Dr. Belmas.